Anish has just made the craziest move. I mean, if you would have asked me to guess 5 moves in this position, I don't think that would have been one of the moves that I would have taken up. The whole board is hanging.
We just witnessed a truly incredible game between Anish Giri with the white pieces and reigning world champion Magnus Carlsen with black. So this is round 4 of the Tata Steel Masters. Let's see what happened. Giri goes d4, Magnus knight f6, c4, e6, and after knight f3 we don't see d5 going back into a queen's gambit declined, but instead b6, the queen's Indian defence. So now g3, preparing to fianchetto, and now Magnus brings the bishop to a6, not b7, which looks more natural because it puts an uncomfortable question to white: how do you want to defend that pawn? Now we see a lot of b3 followed by bishop b4 check stuff, lot of theory there, but queen c2 was played by Giri in this game, and now the bishop just nudges back. Looks really weird, but as I'm drawing there, you've now taken the queen off the d file, and so after bishop to g2, black can strike with c5, and the queen no longer stands behind the pawn, supporting d5. Now d5 is the best move. If you take here, oh, this is doing my head in. You see, I'm getting this so many times right now. The computer keeps just crashing out, or chess.com does. Right, let me refresh. I'm going to leave this in the video because it's just driving me nuts. Okay, we're back. So like I was saying, if you take on c5 here, well then the problem is black recaptures and you've exchanged a central pawn for a flank pawn. That's a better way for black to play. And if instead of capturing you just castle the king, well it's a bit soft. After black takes here, you're losing some of your opening advantage. So d5, main move, and black has to accept this pawn sacrifice now, because otherwise e4 is coming to cement the centre. Black would be a lot worse. So pawn captures, pawn recaptures, and now the knight takes. Now there's a lot of theory from this position, and the idea is that white's hugely ahead in development, which compensates for the pawn. So bishop e7 prepares to castle the king, but here comes the rook pressuring the knight, and now you can't castle the king, or here comes queen e4 about to win a knight. It can't move away or you lose the bishop, so you'd have to start doing things like f5, but then queen c4 pressures down this diagonal. The line goes on, but it's just bad for black. You create all of these weaknesses. White will soon win back the pawn as well. So coming back here, we had knight c6 developing. Now it looks like you hang a piece, but then the follow-up is knight b4, hitting these two, and so you're winning the material back with advantage because you're winning an exchange. So instead we see the queen coming into f5. Queen a4, also a very theoretical move there. The knight now drops back to f6, it was double attacked, and now e4 continues this initiative, preparing e5. Carlsen covers with d6, but e5 anyway, using the pin against the queen. And there's only one move here to deal with all the threats, and it's queen to d7. So now there's no time to actually take this knight, or you lose your queen on f5, and so we see takes on d7 with check. This is the best move. The knight can recapture, and now the pawn is won back on d6. But is this pawn a strength or a liability? Well, you have to play it right as white. So bishop f6 comes out of the way, and now if you get too casual, say you go something like knight c3, well black is better. They can chop this one, for example, and then castle the king away, and this pawn could become weak. The rooks are connected. But what Giri does here is absolutely correct. So he checks the black king, and there's no time for it now to castle, connect the rooks. Now you don't want to block with a minor piece, or you'll be losing a piece after exchange and f4, so it sidesteps to f8, and now Giri carries on this development with knight c3. Magnus goes knight b4, so he's looking to counterattack with a fork on c2. But now we see the brilliant counter shot which Tanya Sachdev was loving on the commentary. So knight to e5, not moving either one of these rooks. Now what's the idea? Well, you open up this bishop attacking here. You also threaten to take with check, and that's why there's no time to say take this one or land a fork, because then we go with check. The rook can't even step to the e-file, and then we'd be winning this piece. You're a piece up there. So instead, Magnus takes on e5. His other consideration was rook to d8. Not too much between those moves. And now we see takes on b7. The rook comes to d8, and rook d1 defends that pawn. But what are you doing after knight c4? It's now double attacked. Well, the pawn kicks on, saves itself. Now we see Magnus land this knight on c2. If he did come king e7 to round up this pawn, well then you can cement it with bishop to c8. Game goes on, different variation. But he brings this knight into c2. The rook comes to b1, and now it comes into d4. Very logical idea, blocking this d-file, preparing to win the pawn, but Giri comes up with a brilliant attacking move here. How do you get this one piece into the game which isn't yet contributing? And the answer to that one is pawn to b4, looking to rip open this diagonal for the bishop. Now it looks loose because you're leaving this piece now unprotected, it's x-rayed by the bishop, but this knight doesn't actually have any good jumps. You know, the bishop's covering here, if it tries here, well the knight's covering, etc. So instead, Magnus goes for something different, but it's a mistake. His best move here is actually pawn h5, trying to activate this rook somehow. But he takes this pawn, looks so logical, but look at that eval bar shoot up. Because now the bishop can retreat, it is attacked, but with tempo, attacking the knight, and when it retreats to d6, e5 was the other option, but neither way matters, you can then start ripping open this diagonal towards the king. So the pawn recaptures, bishop a3, and now you'd love to kind of sidestep this king here, get it off this diagonal, but the problem is then the back rank becomes very weak at the end of a lot of these lines. So the king steps to e7 instead, overprotects this knight, frees the rook to join the battle, but the king is now staggering around the centre of the board, and that spells danger. So we see bishop takes on c5, Giri's now restored the pawn balance. The knight comes to e6, hitting that bishop, it nudges back, maintains the pin, and now Magnus gets desperate. The top engine move here is to chop on c3, and after the bishop recaptures, you've broken the pin, you can land a knight on f5, try and struggle on. But what we see in the game is pawn to a5, with the idea being that you decoy the bishop away from this diagonal, then come rook c8, double attack the knight, and after knight a4, try and free up your pieces like this. But there's still huge threats, this is the problem. So now there's a threat to fort these two rooks here, so knight c4 comes, defends that one, and if bishop captures, well the idea is you can chop a pair of rooks before you then recapture the bishop. So that's why we don't see the bishop capturing the knight. Giri keeps the pressure. He goes rook b to c1, creating a new pin on this rook here. So if the knight moves, then the rook drops. So that's why bishop e5 was now played. The position is held, and it responds to this threat of bishop to b4 check, because you've now given the king a square on f6 when you moved the bishop. And now a star move from Giri. He jumps this knight into c5, hitting this rook, hitting this knight. So the knight captures, but now not recaptures with the bishop. This is Giri's idea. I mean, he's just so in control of the tactics here. He takes the knight on c4. Again, this knight is pinned, or you drop the rook here. So we see the rook coming across to defend this knight, but now bishop a5 finishes the game on the spot, because the rook can't step up here, or you take it with the bishop, and if it steps away to another square, well then you can just intensify the pressure on this knight. It still can't move due to the pin. Magnus had had enough. Crushing game from Anish. If you want to see another fantastic game between Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.